Welcome once again to Noir Alley. I'm your host, Eddie Muller. Now, film noir is considered a post-World War II artistic movement, and today's film, The Stranger, is more significantly post-war than most Hollywood films of the period. The European conflict ended in the spring of 1945, and The Stranger was completed in November of that year. But the project began in 1944, when producer Sam Spiegel bought the rights to a story by Russian émigré Victor Trivas called The Trap. After securing financing from International Pictures, Spiegel hired John Huston and Anthony Wheeler to develop the screenplay, called Date with Destiny, which they completed in June 1945, 1 month after the Allied victory in Europe. But it was Victor Trivas who'd be nominated for an Oscar for Best Original Story, back then a separate category from Best Screenplay. Now, when the film was finally released by RKO in the summer of 1946, it was the first Hollywood feature to bring the reality of Nazi atrocities to American movie screens by incorporating documentary footage of the German death camps. Rather blandly retitled The Stranger, the film more accurately could have been called A Nazi in New England. Its dramatic conceit was to inject the incomprehensible evil of the Nazis' final solution into the bloodstream of a quaint American town, and have an actress emblematic of purity and decency, Loretta Young, falling in love unwittingly with a Nazi fugitive, portrayed by Orson Welles.
But you are the man I have married, and that's all that matters. Darling, I meant it when I said for better or for worse.
At this point in his career, Welles was poison in Hollywood, having earned a reputation, at least among studio executives, as a temperamental artist whose grandiose schemes always lost money. His two previous pictures, The Magnificent Ambersons and Journey into Fear, were disastrous flops, in which Welles's soaring creative ambitions were chopped down to routine size by RKO executives. But independent producer Sam Spiegel felt Welles was perfect for the part of charming and erudite Professor Charles Rankin, who's actually Fritz Kindler, an executor of the Jewish genocide. Now, Welles agreed to star in the film, but only if he could direct it as well. The Stranger was a desperate attempt by Welles to prove that he could make a motion picture on time, on budget, and with minimum behind-the-scenes drama. Spiegel agreed, but only after he'd hired editor Ernest Nims to cut 32 pages of script and draft a rigid editing continuity, to which Welles was contractually obligated to conform. If he got too clever or spent too much money, he'd be replaced as director, while still required to perform his acting duties. Humiliating, to say the least. Now, the constraint on Welles's prodigious talent is undoubtedly what's led many cinema scholars to brand The Stranger as the least notable film on Welles's Hollywood resume. Welles considered it a work for hire, one which curbed his more innovative notions. Now, one of those notions was to have the story's relentless Nazi hunter played by a woman, specifically his longtime Mercury Theater colleague Agnes Moorehead. Well, Spiegel quickly scrapped that intriguing notion and instead cast Edward G. Robinson, whose role as the dogged war crimes investigator essentially reprised his character in Double Indemnity, with significantly less humor.
I'll be in Washington tomorrow afternoon. You were right about Rankin. He's above suspicion.
But on one score, Sam Spiegel knew precisely what he was doing. The casting of Robinson surely had significance for audience members who knew the actor was Jewish. And Loretta Young, playing the paragon of American innocence, so naive she can't, or won't, see the evil behind her fiancé's sophistication, well, that's brilliant casting. The moody cinematography is the work of the great Russell Meddy, who would collaborate with Welles only once more, providing camera work for the director's 1958 masterpiece, Touch of Evil, for which Welles would in many ways repeat the experience he'd had on The Stranger, hired only to give a performance, then virtually donating his directing fee for an opportunity to orchestrate the action. Now, The Stranger's 35-day shooting schedule went off without a hitch, despite some complicated and dangerous setups. It proved to be the smoothest and easiest production of Welles's career. He brought the film in ahead of schedule and under budget, doing little for his reputation as the industry's most notorious enfant terrible. In fact, he delivered the only movie of his Hollywood career that turned a profit on its original release. Now, Welles had hoped that Bernard Herrmann would write the score, but his trusted colleague from Citizen Kane and the Magnificent Ambersons was unavailable. Instead, Spiegel hired a composer he'd previously worked with in Germany, Bronislaw Kaper. And since Spiegel at this time was signing his films under the pseudonym S.P. Eagle, Kaper always referred to this film in similar fashion. So, from 1946, here is The St. Ranger.